So just as a heads up, we are going to be recording this evening's event for all of the members who weren't able to join us during the live version of this, so we can send it out to them later in the future. We do have a couple more people joining here, but I think we have a large room, so we're probably going to get started in just a moment. As I had mentioned before, as you come in, you're going to notice that your microphones are muted. That is because there is a lot of us here today. I'm going to go over a little bit of the logistics of how this evening is going to work. My name is Alan Bauer. You may recognize me if you took any of the behind the scenes member tours that we did several months ago. That was me who gave them, walked you guys through the lab classrooms up onto the roof with Pete's permission. So yeah, give us just another second. We do have a couple more trickling in. All right, so the way that this is going to work today is we do have a wonderful slideshow put together by Pete with the help of some other folks from the tech. If you have questions, we would love to hear your questions. I'm actually going to ask you to use the Q&A function on your Zoom application. So if you're on the desktop, it should be near the bottom. There's a Q&A button. Go ahead and toss your questions on there. Now, Pete does cover a lot of the information of fireworks and the science and technology behind it. So he might actually ask your question, answer your question during the presentation, but don't allow that to stop you from asking your question. Go ahead and ask that. So I think we are going to officially begin here. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our first online member event. With me today, we have Pete Adams. Pete is the Safety and Security Operations Manager for the tech. He's also a licensed commercial and theatrical pyrotechnician with the state of California, currently working for Fireworks and Stage FX America. So once again, go ahead and toss any questions that you have into the Q&A function down at the bottom of your Zoom application. We are going to answer your questions near the end of the presentation. This is going to be recorded for the members that weren't able to join for the live event, so we can send it to them later. And with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Pete Adams. Thank you for joining us today, Pete.
All right, thank you, Alan. So everyone, I just want to cover some of the things that we're going to be talking about today in today's webinar. One of the things we'll start with the actual chemistry involved in a fireworks shell, and then we'll be talking about the different sizes and how they're made and how they get their colors. We'll then move on to how we get them into the sky with the different technology we have for firing systems and our racking systems to fire them up. And then we'll have a couple of videos of some point of view videos that I've shot from some of the shows that I've done with a GoPro on, and then we'll get to the Q&A portion. But first, here's a little reminder about some of the things we're going to be talking about. The topics covered in this presentation are for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be attempted to be recreated. Serious bodily harm or legal issues could result if you attempt to do this. So please leave it to the licensed professionals. If you see any of these things or try to recreate them, leave it to the professionals, leave it to the adults. You don't want to come in contact with any of these types of things. So with that being said, what is a fireworks shell? Okay, so a fireworks shell is a 1.3 G explosive device. Now, that is a commercial grade device, whereas your safe and sane fireworks that you see that they sell in certain counties are a 1.4 G explosive device. And the difference really is the amount of chemical compounds in the different devices. Now, off to the left, you see a 4-inch shell, and they come in different sizes, and you'll see the top going to the left is the actual black match, as we call it, which gets lit and then goes down and lights the firework. And then off to the other side is what we call a E-match bucket. And that's just a little plastic bucket that we'll stick an E-match into. And we'll be talking about these things later on as we get into the firing systems. I'll show you what an E-match is. Now, the different shells come in different sizes, and they go as small as 2.5, and they go up to 8 as photographed here, but they also get bigger. They go 10, 12, 16, 24. But commonly here in the Bay Area, we don't really shoot anything larger than a 12 or a 16, depending on where we are. And we'll get to why later in the webinar. So in the California has some of the strictest guidelines when it comes to fireworks. And every single fireworks or piece of product has to have the California seal on it, the Fire Marshal seal. And there's 4 different categories involved with this. The first one is dangerous, which is the 1.3 G product that I work with. The next is safe and sane, kind of what you see at this fireworks stands. And then there's agricultural. And the agricultural, you're thinking, really, farmers have fireworks? And they do. They have certain pyrotechnic devices that they use to scare off birds that doesn't harm the birds and other animals that may be eating their crops. And then you have snap cap and snappers. And I'm sure you're all familiar with these. These are those snap caps. And if you look right here, that's the state fire marshal symbol. And so in order for this product to be sold in California, it has to have that seal on it. So let's talk about the contents inside of a fireworks shell. And we're gonna start with the shell on your right, the Asian style shell. So the Asian style shell is a round shell, and it starts off at the very top with a fuse. And what happens is that fuse will be lit from either the black match or from the E match lighting the black match. And then that black match travels down and hits what's called a lift charge. Now that lift charge is just simply an explosion that occurs that sends the round shell into the sky. And then we have a time delay fuse. That time delay fuse is lit by the lifting charge, and it's time delay, and it burns very slowly until the shell reaches its peak height. And then it bursts that bursting charge. It ignites it, and that bursting charge hits. And then we have the stars, as they're called, that are around. And the stars are simply round balls made up of different compositions that we'll talk about, and powders that create the actual lighting and the design that you see, kind of like in my background here. Now, the bursting charge isn't exactly the charge that opens the shell up. The stars charge or ignite, and they build up pressure, and that's what ignites the shell and explodes the shell and causes the effect. So in the early 1800s, Marco Polo visited China, and one of the things that he brought back with him was black powder and fireworks. And so the Italians looked at it and said, you know what, we can improve on this, and we can make a much more spectacular shell. And so they created the Italian style shell. And to this day, these are the 2 most common styles of shells that we use in shows. Now, they're just like a base or a template per se that other manufacturers in other countries, including the US, Mexico, Canada, that make their own types of fireworks. So in the Italian style shell, they do things a little bit differently, and they light that fuse at the top, and then that fuse travels down and simultaneously hits the time delay fuse and then goes down and hits the lift charge. And then that lift charge gets the shell up, and then when the time delay fuse comes down enough, it hits the bursting charge, which then charges the stars, and then with the appropriate height, they burst. They build the pressure and they burst. Okay. Now let's take a look inside of actual physical shells. So on your right, we'll start with the Asian style shell. Now you see the black match at the top there coming down, and it hits that lifting charge. I'm sorry, the lift charge, and then it's going to hit that time delay fuse. And when it hits that time delay fuse, it's going to go all the way up into the center. And it's going to hit that braking charge. And then once it hits that bursting charge, those stars, those initial ring of stars go. And then those stars hit another bursting charge that you can see right there in between the 2 rows of stars. And that breaks that second part of the shell. So there's 2 effects in this shell. Now you're seeing that little top hat in the top left of the shell. That's called a tail. Now, sometimes when you're at a fireworks show and you see the shell go up into the sky and there's like sparks going up, that is what you're seeing. That is leaving that tail behind, so it looks like a meteor going up into the sky or a comet. Now, on the Italian side, Italian shells don't have tails. So they light and it travels down the right side of the shell, hits that that lifting charge, and then the time delay fuse goes down, hits that first bursting charge, which is those round stars, and then it hits the next time delay fuse and it bursts and it hits a square charge. Then it hits a third time delay fuse, and that white compound there is either a strobing effect or it's a titanium salute, as we call it. And that's that loud bang that you hear where it just sets all the car alarms off. So that titanium salute, or a report, as we call it, that's what that silver compound is. Now, you've been to a show and you've seen some really cool designs. And you have to remember that all these shells are handmade. There's not a machine that can make these shells. So every single shell is handmade. So it truly is an art. And these people make these shells, and they literally are, as we call it, paint the sky with fire. And the sky is their template. So some of these shells you'll see have designs. So on the right, that's going to be, if everything goes correctly, a happy face. It will light, it'll hit that bursting charge, the stars charge, and then burst that cardboard shell. And then on the left is a star. And so that lifting charge hits that bursting charge and charges the stars, and then boom, hopefully we have a star shape. And once we light it, we hope to get this effect in the sky. You can see the happy face came out pretty good. The star, you can make out what it is, but there's not an exact science to it. You just hope and pray that it comes out correctly and looks good. That's why you typically shoot multiple of those types of shells. So you get good odds of one looking pretty good. And then you have the happy face sometimes turns upside down or whatnot. Now, there's different colors, and to create the different colors in a shell, you have the different types of metals that are used. And we use a lot of common chemistry metals, and salts. So for red, we use strontium salts. For orange, there's calcium salts. Yellow is sodium salts. Green is barium salts. Blue is copper salts. Purple is a combination of copper and strontium. And then silver is like a white hot magnesium or aluminum. And then a white burning metal is a combination of magnesium, aluminum, or titanium, also strobing effects. You also have gold, which is a very common color, and that's made up of sodium also. So lots of different salts. Now, not only do fireworks create colors, but they also create sound. And so the sound is created by the gases that are escaping from the different type of fireworks. So some of the most common are fireworks bangs. And so in a fireworks bang, you have different types of oxidizers and compounds, and potassium, chlorate or potassium perchlorate, sulfur and aluminum, and they create and they produce a flash of light and a loud bang. Then you have crackling type fireworks, and those are created by again, aluminum, magnesium alloy, and they create the smaller granules and when those smaller granules burn up, it creates that crackling sound, kind of like when you're close to a fireplace, and there's a fire or outdoor fire pit and you hear the crackling. Same type of concept there with the different smaller granules that are burning. Now, some fireworks, when they go up, they whistle. And we have different chemical compounds that are added into the firework to create that. And there's gallic acid, sodium silicate, potassium benzoate, and citric acid is also used to create these different types of sounds. Now, there's 1,000 different styles of fireworks. And this is some of the most common that you've probably seen in different fireworks shows. Some of the most common is the chrysanthemum. Then, like I said, the crackles, the crossets, A coconut is also common to see. You can see a couple of dahlias behind me. If I can move my hand, right there is a dahlia. I'm kind of doing this backwards. And that right there's a dahlia. That takes, now I know how the weatherman feels. Um, and then like right before rockets, red glare, you have the comets that will go. Mines you don't typically see too much in a commercial show. Mines, unless it's close up, we typically use those in concerts and other types of close audience special events. Palm trees, peonies are very popular also. A time rain or a willow down at the bottom. Strobes are popular. Spider is another popular one. So these are all some of the very popular types of shell designs that are used in shows. Now, how do we get them up into the sky? So in order to get them up into the sky, we have to build a rack system. Now, depending on the size of the shell, depends on what type of rack they can go into. So if we start off to the left, you can see an Italian style shell sitting next to Asian style shell. And then those are both about 6-inch shells right there. And then it goes down to a 3-inch shell. And you can see the rail system. And the pyrotechnician designs how the shells are laid out. So like right now, I'm currently designing how my 4th of July show is going to look. And so we design it out on in a computer program or something as simple as Excel. And we design out what our layout or plot's going to look like. The middle photo is going to be, that is a finale rack setup. So what you see there are 400 shells, and all those shells are going to go up in a 30-second period. Now you can kind of see the yellow line that goes in between the shells there. That line is a black match that chains the shells together. So when you light one, they all go really fast because that black match travels, when it's in that tube, travels at 100 feet per second. Okay, and when that shell leaves the tube, it's traveling at approximately 75 feet to 100 feet per second as well. Then on the last photo, those are some larger shells. Those are 16-inch shells. And those ones we don't want to put into a rack, just if something goes wrong. So we want to make sure that we bury those in the ground. And so that picture was taken in Arizona. I was doing a show in Arizona with my Northern California team, and we were responsible. It was a very large show, and we were responsible for loading in those 16-inch shells into the ground and wiring those up. Those tubes, those plastic tubes, are made out of HDPE, and it's a special composite. So if something goes wrong, they don't shatter or splinter. They just bulge out and they withstand the blow. So they don't, hopefully don't hurt the other mortars or guns, as we call them, in the racks. And then some of those that you see in the middle photograph are paper, and they're just very thick paper tubes. And those are safe enough to use for smaller 3-inch diameter, but nothing larger shells. So how does the technician lower it in? So the first photo on the left, the technician is holding the black match, and he's holding the shell very carefully, lowering it into the mortar. Then as it goes down, he's grabbing the black match and supporting it as holding what he has in his right hand, the E match. He lowers it down, and once it hits down to the bottom of the tube, he will then secure it to the top of the tube. So, and then once he's done securing it to the top of the tube, he then wires it into the control module. And that control module speaks back to the firing computer system. Now, once we load those in and we wire them up and we fire them, how high will they go? So a basic rule of thumb is that each shell will go approximately 100 feet per inch. So a 2-inch shell is going to go 200 feet in the air. Now, the blasting radius of that shell is approximately 75 feet. But our company policy is that for safety reasons, we just round it up to 100 feet, and the math is easier. So we will say that a 2-inch shell will go 200 feet and blast at 200 feet. And for example, the Trans America Tower there in San Francisco, if we're going to shoot a show over the skyline of San Francisco, I need to shoot at least a 10 or 12, depending on where I am in the skyline. And so you're probably thinking, okay, well, where are you going to shoot that from? We would shoot that from the middle of the bay on a barge. Now, with that large of a shell, as you saw in the pictures from Arizona, you know, we can't bury that. That would be a very long tube to bury into the bay. So what we would do is we would create what's called a sandbox. And a sandbox is kind of like what you saw with those finale shell racks, but they're solid on either side, and it's basically a box, and it's filled with sand, and we will install the tube in that box, and that creates a safe environment for us when we're out on the barge in the middle of the bay firing a large scale shell like that. So when it comes to firing the shells, the different methods that we use, the most traditional and the first method, and is still used to this day, is what we call hand firing. And hand firing uses what's called a fusee, or a simple road flare, or a propane torch. I personally prefer to use the propane torch. There's nothing against the flare, but I don't like holding something that sometimes drips metal and then also burns down, because that means I now need to get closer every time to that shell to light it. So some people prefer it, some people don't, when they prefer the propane torch. So the other method is what's called, I talked earlier about electronic match, or what we call an e-match. And basically what an e-match is, it's a device where it's considered a pyrotechnic device, and it's actually the most unstable device that we handle, because static could set one of these off. And what's on the end of the device is a little ball of black powder, and when it pops, it just sounds like a cap going off. So you see in the middle there, that red nose, kind of like looking like Rudolph's nose sticking through. That's the black match that is ignited when we send a charge to it. And it's tucked into that little red tube or barrel, and it shoots that flame into the black match of the shell and lights it off for us. Now, once we wire it into those rails, wire it in to the shell, we then go on to our next firing system. And this is one of the earliest electronic firing systems that's still used to this day, and it's called a pinboard firing system. And in a pinboard firing system, you have those rails that are in that right photo that run along the ground, and the technician will take the wire, wire it into that rail, and then the licensed operator will then take the red, kind of like the voltmeter handle that you see there in the left photo, and touch each one of those screw heads. And each one of those banks is assigned to one of those rails. So the operator will then hit that screw head every time they want to light a different shell off. And they'll keep to a pace of a music, or if it's just a free fire, as we call it, and they go through, and they may have multiple of these consoles set up depending on how many rails they have in their show. So you can see what you see. You can see the other shell. The other rack right there, control next to it, off to the right in that photo to the left. Now technology has kicked in, and there are hundreds of different operating and different firing systems out there right now. Fireworks America, we typically use a company and a product made by a company called Cobra. And Cobra makes a wonderful product, and it's a wireless system, and it is controlled by a remote control, which is in that left photo in the black box. That is the wireless remote control. And then the yellow box is the actual module. And that module is where the technician wires in the different shells or pieces of product. That remote control can handle up to 100 different of those little yellow boxes. And then those modules work on what's called a mesh network. So many more modules as I have, and I can spread out over multiple rooftops or larger, if I'm doing a much bigger show, let's say in an arena or at a sporting event, a football game, I have multiple places that I'm setting off different fireworks effects. These will create a network, kind of like a cell phone network, and they communicate with each other and boost the signal. Now, Cobra has come out with a computerized system. So, and it is in that, you see in the back photo there off to the right, that is the Cobra Command Center that they've started making. And it is a computerized system, so that way the computer will fire all the shells for me. I can tell it what time, how long, and describe the shell, and it's a great system, and it can control the show for me and fire the show for me. And so they deliver a software that we can use, and we can choreograph our shells to music. Now, my choreographers down in the LA area can write a show for me. Our client sends them the music, they choreograph the show, then email it to me. I download it onto my USB drive, and then I just simply upload it into my device here. You can't really see it but I just upload it into my remote here. And then I have my show programmed, and I have my Cobra command station here, down here, and I can see everything that's in the show. Now, some of our bigger shows, we use a software package called Finale 3D, and this gives us to do a much more intense show or design. And this software is extremely powerful, and it actually allows us to design the show and show the client in 3D what the show is going to look like before the audience sees it. Because if you're paying $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 for a fireworks show, you want to make sure it's good. So I can take it and I can show Alan what the show is going to look like prior to him seeing it. And I can also say we're going to shoot it over his house. I can take Google Earth data and put it into the presentation so it looks as if it's shooting from the audience perspective. And the client can give us feedback as what they like, they don't like, what they want to see more of, and then we can adjust as necessary. So we're going to watch a quick video now, a very quick video of how that software works.
Hi, this is Will Harvey of Finale Fireworks. If you're wondering how long it takes to design and export a show in Finale 3D, I think I can show you in 4 simple steps. You ought to be able to do this in less than 2 minutes. When you launch Finale 3D, this is what you see. On the grass, you see a default set of positions. If I select the positions and insert an effect, the effect appears here on the timeline, and as I scroll back and forth, you can see the show on the screen. Let's say that's our show. That's step 1. Step 2 is to assign the firing system addresses, the modules and pin numbers. The rail and pin column over here in the script window are blank right now because we haven't yet done that. To fill them in, I go to the addressing menu, address show, select my firing system from the large list, click enter. You can see the rail and pin column now filled in with the module and pin numbers for the modules and pins assigned for this show. Step 3 is to export the script for the firing system. That's just a single click. File, export, export firing system script, continue. That produces a file that you can download to your firing system from Finale, copy to a USB, or whatever transport technique is used by your firing system. We're almost done. The final step, step 4, is to print a report for the crew to set up the show. File, print, report. Basic script, rail pin report, tells the crew what modules and pin numbers to assign to what effects at what position. Of course, for a real show, this report will be quite a lot longer, but we've managed to get this done in about 2 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, so as you saw, that's a very quick overview of that software. And what that software does, like if you notice back earlier in the presentation when the technician was lowering the shell down in, one of the shells in the front had an assignment on it and it said 34B. And that meant that that shell goes into rack number 34 and gets plugged into module channel B. For that module 34, rack 34, channel B. And that was a choreographed show. So when it's a choreographed show like that, and our choreographers are designing the show, that way it gets assigned to the appropriate firing pin when the computer tells it to fire that for that shell. So that is Finale 3D, and that's a very impressive piece of software. Now for the next video, I ask that you please turn down the volume. This is a very loud video. This is going to be your point of view video from a show I did in King City last year for the Salinas County Fair. And this action video shows a combination of electronic firing and hand firing. So this is what it looks like from the operator's point of view. I'm sitting there and I'm firing off some shells from my remote and also watching my team to make sure that they're okay, keeping pace, reminding them of time. I don't say a lot of things to my team when they're doing their show, when they're lighting, just because they're in super concentration mode of what they're doing at the task at hand. So the less information I need to yell to them, the better. I just need to tell them exactly what they need to know at that time. And I let them know times, because as they're going down their long strip of fireworks that they're firing off, I have markers, time markers, which are just glow sticks. And they know when they hit a certain glow stick that how much time they should be or where their pace should be in the show. So that way we meet the requirement. The client wanted a 10-minute show. Well, we need to pace it so that we make sure we hit that 10-minute mark. Okay, so we'll go ahead and watch this video now.
You okay? I have another torch right here if you need it. Okay, we're at 6:15. 6:15. Okay, should almost be halfway. We're good on time. We're good on time.
All right, there you go. That's a sneak peek into a 2-minute show, or a 2-minute snippet of that was approximately about a 14-minute show we did last year. So with all that, I threw a lot of information at you in a very short amount of time, but that gives you a good idea of what the pyrotechnics world is and the technology and chemistry and physics behind it. I thank you all for watching. Putting on my other hat, the Tech Interactive hat, I thank you for all being members and supporting the tech, and look forward to seeing you all coming back when we reopen in the future. So I will now turn it over to Alan to handle our Q&A segment.
So Pete, we have a ton of fantastic questions.
Okay.
At least we have almost 3 dozen. We're going to try to get through as many of these as we can. Some of them are kind of similar, so you might hear me kind of bundle your question. Some of them did get partially answered as well, but I'll have Pete try to elaborate. So one of the first questions we got, I know you touched on a little bit, but the explosive powder inside of a firework, is that gunpowder technically?
Technically it is. Technically it is a black powder, like a gunpowder. The granules are a different grade though, but it is technically a black powder.
All right. Another one was about the cardboard shell casing. What's the significance of it being cardboard?
Because we want very little what we call fallout. So we want as much of the product to self-consume. So it will burn up when it goes. So we have you have a little bit of ash that will fall, but we don't want any debris or anything that could possibly hurt somebody in that large debris field or blast field, because we have what we call a fallout zone. So if you have 3-inch shells that you're firing up, you need to make sure that you have at least a 300-foot to 400-foot fallout zone when we shoot a show. So depending on where we do the show really determines what size shell we can shoot, because we have to look on Google Maps and we map it out and look to see what our fallout would be and to keep the public safe during it.
It's fascinating. So this actually kind of goes into another question that we got, which was, it's kind of a two-parter. The environmental concern of the explosion and anything that it might be putting into the air, and then what happens if it doesn't explode? Do they come back down?
They do. And so that would be what we call a dud and in the industry. And we have during a show spotters, and that spotter will watch the shell go and then track it to make sure it actually does explode or detonates. So if it doesn't, then we need to go find it because we don't want somebody else to find it. So we have to go and find that shell. The environmental concern, there are gases being released in the air, but nothing to the point where it's to a high pollutant level. And the sounds and so forth, we encourage our clients that are in like residential areas. So like if I'm doing a show, if we're doing a show at Great America is really good. As you can see the photo to the left, we're the company that does all the fireworks for Great America. And they will, make sure they're very public about when they're doing shows. But when there's a show like the far right in Paso Robles that I shot a couple of years ago, we made sure that the client communicated to any neighbors in the area. So that way they were aware of it so they could take care of any of their family members who may be sensitive to fireworks, to their animals. So that's a concern for us. We want to make sure everybody enjoys the show and nobody is, stressed over a show. So we make sure when we do high school football games and for homecomings, we really, really encourage them to reach out to their local community and communicate about the show happening.
Wow, thanks, Pete. This actually goes again into another really great question. You're so knowledgeable on this subject now. How did you even become a pyrotechnician in the first place? What brought you into the field?
So I started off my previous career. I was in theme park entertainment, and I had a good friend who was a theater technician that I worked with, and we had pyrotechnicians that we worked with that did the fireworks at the park, and he got involved with it. And then when he became an apprentice and he got his license, he recruited me, and I apprenticed under him, and then eventually got my license. What was the other part? How do you get your license? Was that part of the question or no?
Yeah, that is actually one of the questions.
Okay. So in order to get your license as a state of California, and the state has the strictest guidelines, you have to do 8 professional shows in a 2-year period under 5 different license operators. Once you complete that, you have to get 5 letters of recommendation. Then you have to submit your letters of recommendation and your 8 what we call PD post-display reports, PDRs. So you take your PDRs and your letters and your application, you submit it to the state. The state reviews it. The state tells you go for background. You have to take a state background. You have to take an FBI background, Homeland Security background, an ATF background. And every year I have to register with ATF. And then once you clear all your backgrounds, you go to the state offices and you take your written examination. And then you become a licensed operator.
Very cool. So we do have a couple more questions. I know you were talking about the people that you've known in the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your colleagues? How diverse is the team that you work with?
I work with an extremely diverse team. I have currently right now, it's made up of all ages. I think, well, you have to be 18 years old to work on a crew, and you have to be 21 years old to have a license. So we have some 18-year-olds that are on our crew, and we have some folks up in their 60s, mid-60s that are on our crew, mixed of both male and female. I apprenticed under a female operator, and currently right now I have a female apprentice. And they're both, both are very knowledgeable, and everyone on the crews are very knowledgeable. It's really, to get into this industry, it's about who you know. You don't simply go on LinkedIn and find a job posting for a pyrotechnician. So it's really about who you know, because everybody who helps on the team doesn't necessarily have to go through all the backgrounds that I had to do with the state to get my license, but you still have to go through an ATF background, and I have to know you and trust that. Like if I brought Alan on a show, and if he wanted to bring his friend, I've never met his friend before, but I'd want to talk to his friend prior. And then I would trust Alan that this is a good person because I'm about to put an explosive in their hand, and I want to make sure that they're safe, and, that they don't do anything that could jeopardize the safety of themselves and the rest of us.
So on that note, we actually got a question about what kind of equipment, safety, like protective gear, do you actually wear during the show?
Okay, so you may have saw in that little bit of point of view video, we wear retired firefighter gear. So it's a bunker coat with a hard hat and safety glasses, earplugs for certain, and jeans. Everything is cotton. Sometimes we will wear a balaclava. It's called face mask, which a lot of race car drivers wear. It's made out of Nomex. And so we'll wear those just to protect ourselves. Every time we're doing an electronically fired show, if it doesn't have any hand-fired elements to it, we're standing 100 feet back. That's a requirement per the state fire marshal's office. And the state fire marshal office has a whole section. It's called Title 19. And Title 19 has all the rules and laws that you have to study in order to get your license, and that you have to follow.
I see. So on that note, another question we had was, you said that all fireworks of this caliber, they're made by hand. But is it a good idea for somebody to try to make fireworks in their own home? No,
because then you've committed a federal felony. Because you are thus creating a bomb. So if it's one thing if you're caught with an illegal firework, it's another if you try to make it. So you have to be licensed to make them. You have to go through certain, in order to get, buy the chemicals used in large quantities, you have to be licensed and registered with the ATF. Our facilities, because our company, Fireworks America, is an importer-exporter, of fireworks, and we make some of our own also. We have the ATF that comes out and inspects our facilities. So if you are caught making something now, especially after everything has happened in our past with terrorist acts and so forth, you can be charged with a federal felony because you are in theory making an explosive device or a bomb.
So it sounds like when you are handling fireworks, there is a portion of it that is unsafe. So when you are actually launching a show, how safe are you, and what are the risks?
So the safety starts right from the beginning. The second that those shells or fireworks get unloaded from the truck, the safety, everyone goes into high attention. And you have to handle, and there's certain protocols and procedures I won't get into too much on how to handle the product. But static as electricity is your worst friend in the fireworks business. So you want to do everything you can to prevent any type of static charge. So we practice a lot of safety. We're not listening to music, we're paying attention to what everybody's doing, where everybody is. If there's a problem with the shell, let's say that something doesn't look right, or the black match broke, or something's not correct, I'll take the shell and I'll remove myself from everybody else and fix it and then bring it back. But I've removed myself if something were to go wrong from everybody else. And then if you saw in some of the photos, we had some of the shells laid out. Well, we only lay out what's necessary. We don't have a ton of product laid out, just what's necessary. So that way, if there is something that happens, a bunch of product doesn't go off, only what's exposed. And we only expose what you're currently working on.
Fantastic, Pete. We did have a few questions that were kind of along the lines of themed shows that are usually timed with like music, that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so those shows are handled with the client. The client can choose music and then select a budget amount. And then those shows are typically sent down to our LA offices, and our choreographers will design the show in Finale 3D and then send the show up to me, and then I download it and load it into my Cobra system, and it's good to go. And then I get the queue report and all that tells me, which racks and the plot plan and so forth. So that way I'm able to tell my crew how to wire it all up.
Wonderful. So Pete, we only have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to try to pull out a couple good ones here. Somebody asked, we're seeing a lot more drones in the skies these days. Are drones going to, and they can do light shows, are drones going to eventually replace fireworks, do you think?
I don't think so. Simply because they can't fly as long. They have a very short time span. The cost for a drone show is insanely expensive. And we're looking at ways, to possibly combine the two. We've been, looking at that. But I don't think that drone shows will be a serious competition per se. I think there'll be a possible great added effect. Depending on the venue, I think if you're like in an arena or something like that, I think it'd be really, really cool. But there's just nothing that beats the sound and the boom and the light and the concussion of a firework.
So talking indoor versus outdoor, when you are outdoor and say that the weather might not be the best, or if it's windy, what kind of considerations do you have to have?
So what we'll do is, if it's a really windy show, or really windy, it may be windy down where we are, but I don't know what the elements are 300, 400, 500 feet above us. It may not be as windy up there. So what we'll do, and I'll talk it over with the local fire authority or the fire marshal. So every time we shoot a show, we have a fire marshal standing right next to us. I'll talk it over with them, and we'll see what they want to do. And if I have concerns, we will send a test shell. And so I'll wire up, if I know that it's going to be a little windy, I will send up a test shell and see where it goes. And it's a smaller diameter shell. And then we'll make a judgment call. Do we hold the show for a little while? But we can typically shoot in most conditions and still keep the audience safe, depending on everybody's safe, depending on which way the wind's blowing. But we have to look at airplanes, depending on what size of shell I'm shooting. So if I have an app on my phone and flight radar, and I look to see what the air traffic is like, and then about a half hour before my show, I'll ping the tower at the airports and let them know that we have a show going and what my ceiling is, meaning the height of my highest shell. And then they advise all the local aircraft that may be flying through that area.
Okay, Pete, I'm going to try to give you maybe one or two more, and then we'll
Okay.
try to wrap it up. We did get a lot of questions about just the general cost of fireworks, a fireworks show, hiring the technician, the shell. How expensive would you say your average show is?
So we can shoot a show for a decent amount. It's really the expense that comes in with your fees, your permits, so that is where it gets kind of expensive. But different shells of different quality and different designs cost more money, and the size of the shell costs if it's choreographed. But let's just say your typical 4th of July show can range anywhere from $30,000 to $150,000. It
Wow.
really depends on how big of the shell, how much product, whether it's choreographed to music. There's a lot of factors in it, but your average show that you see here in the Bay Area is probably around $50K.
Wow. All right, so we're going to end this this portion of this with a very tech question. Somebody asked, because the Cobra system has a wireless signal, is there a chance that wireless signal could be hacked?
No, it is continually, it's a very secure network that it's on, of its own network, and it's constantly changing, so it's difficult. We more so have to work closely when we go into like stadiums, when we do football games and other sporting events. We need to make sure everyone has to release to the control techs and stuff what frequencies and so forth that we're using, megahertz, so that way we're not cross communicating with anything like that they may be using or interfering with each other. So they really monitor all of that aspect, and so is law enforcement and so forth. But there hasn't been anything hacked. You have to really pair, kind of like when you pair your Bluetooth headphone with your phone, same type of thing. I have to pair my remote with a module. So I have my own personal equipment, but if I have to use more, if I need more modules and I borrow from Fireworks America, I will program their module to respond to my remote by pairing them.
All right, Pete, thank you so much. And thank you all, everybody. I know we weren't able to answer 100% of the questions, but we actually did get through a ton of them. We're going to talk really quickly about what's coming up. Once again, huge thanks to Pete Adams, our safety and security manager, and also working with his company and all of the photos that they worked, the Fireworks and Stage FX America. Thank you to Deanna, Darlene, and the membership team that made this possible. We do have something real quick to show you. So looking ahead, we do have some things coming up. So you probably received the email from the membership department, but we do have a cooking class coming up from our chef, Tony. He's in just a couple weeks here, he's going to be showing us how he prepares some food, and he would love you to join, and so you could take a peek on that. You can find that as always, thetech.org/members/events-perks. There's also a ton of new activities that are coming up this summer. They're going to be released kind of on like a weekly basis. Members do get a first sneak peek on what that looks like. You can see that at thetech.org/summer unplugged members. And right now there's a ton of content on our website at thetech.org/at-home. A lot of do-it-yourself activities, fun for the whole family. Really, really great stuff. So I think we do have one more thing to show you guys, and then we're going to be done. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This was a really, really fun event. Again, thanks to Pete for the presentation. Thanks to TJ over on our IT team to make sure this is possible. Thank you for our membership department. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you all for making us the wonderful place that the tech is.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And from Fireworks America, I know right now, COVID-19 and keeping our social distance, there's a lot of fireworks shows that aren't happening this 4th of July. So there's very few that are actually happening in Northern California. You can kind of search them out. But we wanted to leave you from Fireworks America with this message. Thank you for attending today.